We live our lives thinking that danger always comes like a storm, sudden, loud, and violent. We look out for major sins, massive temptations, and obvious catastrophes. But the most dangerous enemy we face does not work like that. Shaytan takes his time to destroy people. He's not like humans. Humans are impatient, we want quick results, we rush into things, and we get tired. Shaytan is calculated, profoundly patient, and plays an agonizing long game. He does not rush to ruin a person overnight. Instead, he studies what is hidden inside our hearts, our brains, our psychology, and our souls. He maps out our specific vanities, our blind spots, and our hidden weaknesses. He might work on dismantling a person not for 1 year, not for 2 years, and not even for 3 years. He has the chilling discipline to wait as long as it takes, chipping away at a person's defense millimeter by millimeter, until the fortress finally collapses. To understand how this terrifying psychological warfare works, we only have to look back at one of the most sobering, chilling parables in our history, the story of Barsisa the Worshipper. Picture a man who lived decades, some historical narrations say 60, even 70 years in absolute uninterrupted devotion. His entire existence was anchored to his place of worship. He lived in a remote hermitage, far from the noise of distraction and temptation of the worldly society. His days were spent bowing, his nights were spent prostrating. He ate minimally, slept scarcely, and dedicated every working breath to the remembrance of his Lord. Naturally, the people of the surrounding lands noticed. Word spread about the ascetic hermit who never left his cell. To the villagers, Barsisa was more than just a pious man. He was a living saint. When they looked at him, they didn't see a man struggling with inner demons. They saw a mountain of granite, unshakable, pure, and untouchable. They brought him food, they sought his prayers during times of hardship, and they placed him on a pedestal of absolute righteousness. If you had walked into that village during those decades and asked anyone about Barsisa, they would have sworn on their lives that this man could never fall. They believed his righteousness was permanent. And that was the very first vulnerability, the illusion of immunity. When a person is surrounded by constant praise, when everyone looks up to them, a subtle spiritual pride can't root. Not necessarily arrogance, but a quiet, dangerous sense of security. A feeling of, I have worshipped for so long, surely the major tests are behind me. But Satan looks at a mountain of 60 years of worship, not with despair, but with a challenge. He looks at the man and the worshippers to himself. Give me time. The test did not arrive as a sudden hurricane. It arrived quietly, disguised as a righteous duty. In the nearby town, there were 3 brothers, men of good standing and faith, who suddenly found themselves forced to undertake a long journey out of town. They had a sister. She was modest, pure, and entirely under their protection. But they could not take her with them through the dangers of the open road, nor could they leave her unattended in their home. They sat down to deliberate Who in this entire region is pure enough, safe enough, and completely detached from the corruption of the world to keep our sister secure? They searched their minds, and every single sign pointed to one man, the hermit, the saint Barsisa. They gathered provisions, packed their belongings, and journeyed out to the remote hermitage with their sister. When they arrived, they approached Barsisa with deep reverence. They laid out their dilemma, pleading with him, tears in their eyes, to take their sister under this roof and protection while they were away. At first, Barsisa shrank back. He looked at the woman and then at the brothers and immediately sought refuge in Allah. He was a man of seclusion. He did not want distraction, complications, or the presence of a stranger disrupting his decades of solitude. He told them flatly, "No, I cannot take this responsibility. Look elsewhere." But the brothers persisted. They argued with desperate earnestness. "Who else is there? We trust no one else with her honor and safety. You are a man of God. If not you, who?" They wore him down, not through temptation, but through the absolute trust in his integrity. Reluctantly, feeling a sense of obligation to help fellow believers, Barsisa agreed. He directed them to build a small room or a separate quarters adjacent to his hermitage, where she could stay isolated, protected. The brothers departed with peace in their hearts, believing they had left their sister in the safest hands on earth. They had no idea what machinery they had just set into motion. This is where the true brilliance and terrifying patience of Shaytan are laid bare. If Shaytan had whispered to Barsisa on day one, "Corrupt this woman," Barsisa would have recoiled in horror, thrown water on his face, and driven the thought away instantly. Barsisa was too pious for a direct assault. So Shaytan did not rush. He played the long game. Phase 1, the threshold for a time. Barsisa maintained strict boundaries. When the daily meal was prepared, he would walk over and place the food completely outside her door, step back into the shadows, and walk away. He refused to speak. He refused to let himself near the sound of her voice. The boundary was absolute. Phase 2, the voice. Weeks passed. Then Shaytan introduced the first micro-whisper into Hermit's mind. It didn't sound evil. It sounded reasonable. "Look at her," the whisper hummed. "She is locked away in that lonely room all day. She has no family, no conversation, no human warmth. She must feel terrified and abandoned. You are a man of knowledge and mercy. Is it not a kindness to at least speak to her through the door, to offer a word of comfort and check if she needs anything?" Barsisa rationalized it. There is no sin in speaking words of comfort. So, the next time he brought the food, he didn't walk away in silence. He spoke, a brief, polite inquiry through closed wood. Then a longer conversation the next day. Then daily exchanges. The wall of silence had been breached. Phase 3, the glance. Once the voice was established, the invisible barrier of the door felt heavy. Shaytan pressed the advantage. "A voice is just a voice," the whisper returned, softer this time. "But she is young, she is human, and isolation weighs heavy on the soul. Go to the doorway. Open it just a crack. Just look at her for 1 second to ensure she is well, eating properly, and hasn't fallen ill. Barisa hesitated. His conscience fled, but months of minor softening had worn down his reflexes. He walked to the door, pulled it open a mere inch, and looked inside. He told himself it was just a passing glance, an act of oversight. But his eyes had crossed a line. The heart always follows the eyes. Phase 4. Entering the room. From a glance through a crack, the descent accelerated. Shaytan didn't need to push hard anymore. Momentum was carrying the boulder down the hill. She is right there, and you are standing in the cold hallway. Shaytan whispered, "Go inside, sit with her for a moment. Keep her company properly, face to face." Barisa stepped across the threshold. The door closed behind him. The conversation shifted from brief welfare checks to hours of intimate dialogue. The man who had spent 60 years in solitary worship was now spending his hours sitting closely with a stranger in a private room. From sitting in the room, the psychological defenses were entirely hollowed out. The inevitable happened. The boundary was shattered entirely, and Barisa fell into sin. In a single catastrophic moment, decades of worship, decades of prostration, and a lifetime of spiritual capital evaporated into nothingness. Silence descended upon the hermitage. The spiritual light that Barisa had cultivated for a lifetime went pitch black. Panic, cold, suffocating panic flooded his veins. Reality crushed down upon him. The guilt was so immense, so unbearable, that his mind fractured under the weight of what he had done. And this was the exact moment Shaytan delivered his final masterstroke trap. In Islam, the door of repentance is always open, no matter how massive the sin is. Even if a mountain of sins is committed, turning back to the most merciful in immediate, weeping repentance can wipe it clean. But Shaytan blocked that doorway completely. Instead of repentance, Shaytan whispered the voice of self-preservation, ego, and earthly fear. If the brothers returned from their journey and found out what happened, your entire life is over. Your reputation, your pedestal, your decades of status destroyed instantly. The villagers will stone you, cover it up, silence the secret, and no one will ever know. The trap closed completely. To protect his honor in the dunya, Barisa chose eternal ruin in the akhirah. The woman became pregnant, driven by madness, fear, and complete spiritual blindness. Barisa committed a monstrous, unspeakable crime. He murdered her. He took her lifeless body and buried it secretly in a shallow grave near the base of his hermitage. When he saw the freshly turned earth, he wiped the sweat from his brow and tried to convince himself that the storm had passed. Months later, the brothers returned. They dismounted their horses, walked up to the path to the hermitage, and joyfully asked for their sister, eager to thank him once more. Barisa looked them in the eye and lied. With a cold face, he told them she fell ill suddenly and despite all my care, she passed away. I buried her right over there. He even pointed to a fabricated grave. The brothers wept, thanked him for trying, prayed for her soul, and prepared to leave. But secrets buried by human hands do not stay hidden from the knower of the unseen. Through a divine revelation, a dream given to the brothers, or a sudden exposure, the absolute horror of what Barsisa had done was brought to light. The authorities and the villagers rushed up the mountain. They dug up the earth and found the truth. Barsisa was seized, stripped of his garments of piety, bound in heavy iron chains, and dragged out of his hermitage to face public execution. As Barsisa stood bound on the gallows, broken, humiliated, and having lost everything in this world and the next, the final act of this tragedy unfolded. Shaytan, the very entity who had orchestrated every single step of this descent over years of patient plotting, appeared to him physically or through a final overwhelming whisper. The enemy looked at the ruined worshipper and said, "I am the one who led you into this. I brought you here step by step. But listen to me now. I can save you. All you have to do right here, right now, in front of everyone, is bow down to me just once, and I will rescue you from these chains." Look at the depths of the delusion. Barsisa, whose back had spent decades touching the ground in pure prostration only for Allah, looked at Shaytan in his final moments of despair, his mind completely gone. He nodded his head in submission. He bowed to Shaytan. And in that exact instant, Shaytan vanished into the wind, leaving him to draw his final breath in a state of absolute irreversible disbelief. And this brings us to a profound, sobering reality that we must all recognize about human nature. We have to stop putting people on pedestals. We so often fall into the trap of looking at someone who is outwardly religious, deeply pious, or outwardly knowledgeable, and we believe they can do no wrong. We give them a credit of absolute infallibility, but no one should ever be given that credit until they are safely in their grave. Look at the giants of our history, famous scholars like Abu Hanifa, Imam Bukhari, the four Imams, and the other legendary figures who have completed their worldly affairs. We can talk about their legacy, praise them, and trust them because they are in their grave. Their worldly life is done. They are no longer going to come back, and they are no longer exposed to anything that the Shaytan could make them do. Their record is sealed. Until a living human being draws their last breath in a state of faith, no one is safe. Every single living person is human. No matter how much religious knowledge someone carries or how much they appear to be a saint on the outside, they are still fighting their own ego, their own tests, and the patient whispers of Shaytan. The story of Basisa is a warning for all of us to drop our illusions, maintain our humility, keep our guard up, and never stop praying that Allah keeps our hearts firm on the straight path until our very last breath.